This is the third Sunday of Easter. And the Gospel today is the story of the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24, 13 to 35. Like many of you, I enjoy to walk with a friend along a path outdoors through the bush or by the river or the sea. And when we're walking with a good friend this way, it can seem that as we walk together, we're more able to free ourselves to speak our hearts and minds to each other. It can be a time when we're able to really share what might be troubling us or giving us joy. So the two disciples are talking as they walk towards Emmaus from Jerusalem, when Jesus draws near and asks what they're discussing so intently. They do not recognize him. Just as Mary did not first recognize the risen Jesus and mistook him for a gardener, so the two disciples see him as simply a stranger on the road. Do you find too that when we're walking with a friend and talking, when we come to a part of our conversation that's particularly significant, we might slow down and eventually stop and look at each other? You know that Cleopas stops and addresses the newcomer, a stranger, looking sad, and expresses astonishment that he doesn't know about what's happened, and he still doesn't recognize him. Grief and confusion have clouded his mind, and he and his companion are unable to make sense of what has happened, and they seem to have largely dismissed what the women have told them as almost an idle tale. Certainly their words and actions don't reflect the reality of the resurrection, but instead the terrible grief of the crucifixion. They speak of their hope that Jesus of Nazareth would be the Messiah to redeem Israel, but in the past tense. The hope is over. They are disappointed and sad. They can't grasp the relationship between suffering and the Messiah. For the Messiah they hoped for would never in their minds have to suffer in this way. After accompanying them along the road for a while, the stranger's about to depart when that true gesture of true hospitality to a stranger that they make brings Jesus closer to them. Night is falling, and they invite him to stay with them. And so begins the experience of hospitality and table fellowship that reveals who Jesus is to them. Not only his physical identity, but his divine nature and resurrected self. Jesus tells them they are foolish and slow of heart. It's only then that they recognize the divine presence among them, and their eyes are opened just as he disappears. And they recall, but were not our hearts burning within us as we walked with him along the road? Do you have times when life just doesn't seem to make sense? You've been foolish and slow of heart. When you feel like you can't tell up from down anymore, something's wrong, something's missing, and perhaps we think we're on the wrong path. But we might find that it's not so much that we're taking a wrong path, but that we've misunderstood the path before us altogether. The disciples are foolish, but not for want of intelligence, but in how they couldn't see how their lives could fit in with God's story. They failed to see the direction the story was headed, so they couldn't understand how they ended up where they did. They didn't know what their role was and couldn't understand that Jesus died and was resurrected to live in them. Like them, we tend to see ourselves as people defined by our own stories, the ones we create for ourselves, rather than the story of God's ongoing mission in the world. And when we interpret or seek to understand our hardships in the light of our own stories, instead of asking how what's happening fits into the greater story of God, we often miss the point. It was this failure to understand their place in the ongoing story of God that wrecked the disciples and left them sad and confused. It was this that caused them to lose hope. The disciples show disappointment, foolishness, sorrowful trudging on the road, and slowness of heart as they walk along and talk with the stranger. I think we recognise these things as obstacles to our spiritual transformation. But all this is abandoned at the meal together. And the disciples' eyes are open to God's way of working in the world, and they recognise their beloved leader. They have a fresh understanding and obedience to serve as witnesses of these things, and fully recognise the resurrected Jesus. My prayer is that we will seek the face of the Lord in everyone we meet on this journey together, and always walk with him in the eternal light of the resurrection. Let us, in this time of isolation from each other, remember that we are not alone, but recognise that we have Christ as our companion on the road. The Lord be with you.